Have you ever played Pac-Man or its much better sequel Miss Pac-Man? You know, the classic dungeon crawler survival horror mini Metroidvania collectathon Pac-like. I personally really like Pac-Man. It's a great game, and it's got a lot of really good design philosophies. Namely, one of them being the fact that when you die, you're done. There's no continues, there's no save points, it's over. The objective in Pac-Man is simple. Eat all the dots in a maze to beat the level, eat a fruit to get more score, and try to get a high score. On its own, it's not that interesting, which is where the twist of Pac-Man comes into play. There's a ghost. How spooky. And if you touch these ghosts, you die. You lose your life and you inch closer to having to put another token in that machine. But you're not entirely out of luck here, because if you eat one of the big dots, or power pellets, the ghost will turn blue and run away, and you can then eat them to get more points. This adds a lot of planning and reaction to the gameplay of Pac-Man. The player has to think, is it worth it to go to this area? I mean, there's a ghost there. Or the player could try to lure the ghost to them, and then eat them all up to get a really big point bonus. They could make the player take a different path than what they normally would. Hell, if the player knows how they act, then they could make an even more deformed decision on where they should be going. Yeah, the ghosts act differently from each other. Blinky, the red one, just goes directly towards the player at any time. Pinky, the pink one, tries to cut the player off in front of them. Inky, the blue one, is stupid and confusing and I hate him. And Clyde, or sometimes referred to as Sue, good for her, moves completely randomly. So editor me, how are you doing? Put this up on screen. Pac-Man at the time wasn't a very unique game. There were tons of games with a similar general formula, but at some point when home consoles hit the market, the arcade game genre basically died out, mainly because developers were able to make games with more progression in gameplay and story, like Zelda. But in recent years there's been a new genre that's been very, very popular, called roguelikes. Roguelike isn't exactly a neatly defined genre. If you find a game labelled as one, you don't entirely know what you're getting into. It's more of a add-on descriptor. Descriptor that means if you fail, you start again from the very beginning. And you will fail a lot. That failure can come in many forms, whether that's not meeting a quota, failing an objective, or just plain dying. Either way, you lose all your progress and start from the very beginning. Now that doesn't mean that there's no progression in these games. Sure, some of them won't have any progression other than pure player skill, like Spelunky for example, but others will add new items to the random item pool, like Crypto the Necrodancer, and some will even give players access to upgrades and new starting loadouts, weapons and characters, like Hades, Mortal Sin, One Step from Eden. There's a lot of them, but it does mean that you'll have to make it through a run in one attempt. This to me is a clear evolution on those classic arcade games. Taking the design philosophy those games were built around and adapting it for the modern day, the Pac is back, in card form. But other than that minor progression, what separates these from arcade games? Well, randomness.
In my opinion.
Randomness in these games, or RNG for short, comes in many forms. The levels can be, and usually are, randomly generated. The items are randomly picked. Sometimes the tools that you have are even picked at random. These instances of RNG are what defines roguelikes to me. Today, I'd like to highlight a recent favourite of mine, Balatro. It was either this or I talk about One Step from Eden for 6 hours, and I'm not editing that. Balatro, or Balatro, is a poker-themed deck builder roguelike where the player has to build poker hands to beat chip requirements in a blind. It's also not gambling, even if it looks like it. Peggy. The only money that you'll put into Balatro is the £13 it'll cost you to buy the game on Steam, and the eventual £300 to £600 that you'll end up spending on the Steam Deck to play it on the toilet. In fact, I want to add the fact that Balatro is so not gambling that the developers even written into their will that they don't permit the rights to Balatro to ever be sold to any gambling or casino companies. In a run of Balatro, the player has to meet a certain score quota using the cards they're given to beat a blind. They have a limited number of hands, playing up to 5 selected cards per hand. Each poker hand has a different base chip value and base multiplier value, also called your mult for short, and a limited number of discards, letting the player discard up to 5 cards and replacing them with an equal amount of cards, usually. This is mainly used for a chance of playing a better hand. Now, much like Pac-Man, that on its own doesn't sound very interesting, but like Pac-Man, there's a twist. Good news. Scary to some, attractive to others. These cards are placed above your hand and add a unique game-altering effect. These can be anything from just adding onto your mult, giving you extra money, or creating a negative copy of every consumable card you're holding when you leave the shop. Oh yeah, there's 150 of these, by the way. You gain these jokers and other things like tarot cards, planet cards, spectral cards, and regular playing cards from the shop after you clear a blind, using the money that you get from clearing blinds. These jokers and other cards add so much to the game. They seem small, sure, but the way that they interact with everything can just severely impact the way that you play it. If you leveled a 3 of a kind using the planet cards to level 2, suddenly it's better than a full house, which is basically a 3 of a kind and a 2 of a kind together. Level it further to level 6 and now it's better than a straight flush, the otherwise highest ranking poker hand in the game. Not including the secret hands, of course. Cards like Burn Joker might influence you to level a high card more. The worst hand in the game, pair it with something like Half Joker, Blueprint, and a couple stone cards maybe, and suddenly it's so broken that you basically have to try to lose. There's tons of synergies like this that really work together, like Smiley Face, which adds a 5 multiplier every time you score a face card, and the one that makes every card count as a face card. So now every single hand that you play basically has an extra 5 to 12 mult for free. That's a lot. Or Egg, a joker that gains $3 of sell value after every round, and Ceremonial Dagger, a joker that at the start of the round removes the joker to its right, and takes double its sell value, and adds that to its multiplier. So now, after a couple of rounds, you get a massive bonus to your mult, as long as you remember to organize your jokers right. Oh yeah, there's 150 of these. So I've outlined what Balatro is, and what the jokers add to it. But what makes it difficult? Other than just making the number big, which, trust me, can get difficult at the higher antes, in Balatro the objective is to get to ante 8. To beat an ante, you have to beat the boss blind. To beat the boss blind, you have to beat the first 2 regular blinds. Or do you? No. You can actually skip them, which gives you a chip. That chip can then give you other things, whether that's jokers, spectrals, planets, regular cards, potential jokers, potential money, like crypto but less of a scam. But skipping blinds also means that you skip the blind. You don't get the shop after you beat it, and you don't get the money that you get from beating the blind. Which, trust me, if you don't have the right jokers and modifiers, you're gonna lose. But about those boss blinds I mentioned earlier, you remembered. Great job. Attention spans are fleeting. They're the last blind in an ante, as I mentioned earlier, and they all have a special effect that affects how you play the game. Very negatively most of the time. All of the time. Some force you to only play one hand. Some will get rid of all your discards. Some of them will just have really big score quotas. Some will flip your cards so you can't see them under certain conditions. Some will debuff your cards that they don't count towards scoring. They'll still count towards your hands though, so, you know, that debuffed 10 of hearts will still count towards your pair. An example of a debuff blind would be the plant, which debuffs all your face cards. The one that makes every card count as a face card. Oh, these effects are so interesting to me. Not just the boss blinds, everything. All of it. Sure, they're simple on their own, but alongside everything else in the game, there's just so much depth. There's so many different decisions that the game just lets you make. A thing that a lot of modern games have kind of forgotten. So after you've gotten your jokers, and reached the 8th ante, and beaten the final boss blind, and you've done it with all the different kinds of stakes, what happens? Well, you keep going. Until you fail, that is. This is a thing that many roguelikes have. In ones with more clearly defined levels, like Risk of Rain, it usually comes in the form of looping the levels. This doesn't mean that there's no ending, but it does mean that if you want to keep going, you can. See how long you can go without failing. When you do fail, you start over from the beginning again, back to square one, or square one plus, with a couple buffs sometimes, depending on the game that you're playing. You'll have the same opportunities, but on-the-fly decision-making and the luck the game deals you, sometimes literally, can entirely change how a run goes. Like in the arcade games! That's the design philosophy I love about Pac-Man, and I'm glad I didn't die with arcades. I could probably have recorded that in the arcade world. Thank you so much for watching this to the end. I know making a video longer than 30 seconds that isn't about mindless drama is basically a death sentence for viewer attention, but I'm glad that I'm able to talk about a thing that I'm passionate about. Yeah. If you want some game recommendations that weren't in this video, I highly recommend One Step from Eden, Enter the Gungeon, Buckshot Roulette, Slay the Minotaur. Those are the roguelikes, by the way. Blah, 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 blah. I organised this in my script funny. And when it comes to arcade games, there's not really a lot of new ones that come out, but Burger Time, Space Invaders, Frogger, Crazy Taxi. A lot of the newer ones are mobile games though, so I don't know, Flappy Bird. But a new one that came out somewhat recently, it's called UFO 50, an amazing collection of like 50 fake NES era games that never actually existed, but well, they exist now, I guess. And okay, some of them are just really, really good arcade style games, like Magic Garden. Magic Garden's a really good one. Generic YouTube ending. Like, subscribe, hit button, do thing, funny catchphrase, play SLA RPG, it's a really good game.